I still remember the day clearly. The smell of gasoline, the sound of cars pulling in and out, and the scorching afternoon sun. I was waiting in line at the gas station when I saw her. Tall, elegant, and draped in designer clothes. Everything about her screamed wealth. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she stepped out of her gleaming black Mercedes. She was beautiful, but there was something cold about the way she carried herself. The gas station attendant, a young man in a worn-out uniform, walked over to her with a polite nod. His name tag read Daniel. He looked exhausted, probably at the end of a long shift, but he still managed a small smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How much would you like to fill up?" he asked, his voice steady but tired. She barely looked at him. Instead, she let out an impatient sigh and adjusted her sunglasses. "Full tank. And hurry up," she said, waving a manicured hand as if dismissing a servant. Daniel nodded and got to work, but she wasn't done. "Honestly, I don't understand how people do this kind of job. It must be miserable," she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. I saw his shoulders stiffen for a second, but he didn't say anything. He just kept working, his hands steady as he held the nozzle. She continued, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Do you even make enough to survive? I can't imagine living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, look at you, oil stains on your uniform, dirt under your nails. Ugh." She wrinkled her nose as if his very presence offended her. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Her words were sharp, cruel, unnecessary. I wanted to say something, but before I could, Daniel simply met her gaze with quiet dignity. "Ma'am," he said softly, "work is work. There's no shame in earning an honest living." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Sure, keep telling yourself that." I could see Daniel swallow hard, but he said nothing more. He just handed her the receipt and walked away to the next car. She got back into her Mercedes, flipping her hair as if she had just done the world a favor by existing. I watched Daniel for a moment. There was something about the way he carried himself, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with a quiet resilience. And I had a strange feeling. This wasn't the end of the story. A week passed, and I didn't think much about that moment at the gas station until I found myself at an exclusive charity gala. I wasn't rich like the people around me, but I had been invited through a friend who worked for the event organizers. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, golden decor, and tables draped in elegant white cloth. The air buzzed with laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the hum of polite conversations. And then, I saw her. The same rich woman from the gas station, draped in another expensive dress, surrounded by people who hung on to her every word. She was smiling now, charming and graceful, as if she were a completely different person. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. She had been so quick to belittle someone she thought was beneath her. Then the announcer took the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight. It is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, someone who has not only inspired many, but has also made a significant impact through his generosity and hard work. Please welcome Mr. Daniel Carter." My breath caught. I turned toward the stage, and my eyes widened as I saw him. The same Daniel from the gas station, but now he looked completely different. He stood tall in an expensive, well-tailored suit, his presence commanding the room. The exhaustion in his eyes was gone, replaced with quiet confidence. The rich woman, who had just been laughing with her friends, suddenly stiffened. I watched as her face turned pale, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. Daniel took the microphone, his voice calm and warm. "Many of you know me as the founder of Carter Industries," he began. "But what some of you may not know is that my journey wasn't easy. I grew up with very little. I worked every job I could, janitor, chalk cashier, gas station attendant, whatever it took to survive. Because work, no matter how small, has value." I glanced at the woman again. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes locked on Daniel, as if she were seeing him for the first time. He continued, "I know what it's like to be judged by appearances, to have people assume your worth based on the job you do. But I've learned that kindness costs nothing, and respect is something every person deserves, no matter where they are in life." There was a long silence in the room. Even the rich woman seemed frozen, her arrogance crumbling. Then Daniel's eyes scanned the crowd, and for just a brief moment they landed on her. I saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition. She swallowed hard and looked away. And I knew in that moment that she regretted everything she had said. The applause was thunderous as Daniel stepped away from the microphone, his speech still lingering in the air like an unshakable truth. People rose to their feet, some clapping, others nodding in admiration. There was a shared sense of respect in the room, a recognition of the kind of man Daniel Carter was. Not just wealthy, but wise, grounded, and compassionate. But I wasn't watching them. I was watching her. The rich woman stood motionless, her back stiff, her fingers clutching the edge of the tablecloth, as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. The confidence she had flaunted earlier, the haughty way she had dismissed Daniel as nothing more than a lowly gas station worker, had vanished. Her face, once glowing with pride, was now pale, her eyes darting between Daniel and the guests surrounding him. She looked shaken. I could almost hear the thoughts racing in her mind. The weight of her mistake settled visibly on her shoulders, pressing down with an intensity that made her shrink into herself. She had laughed at a man she believed was beneath her. She had looked at him with disdain, mocked his job, belittled his existence. And now she stood in a room filled with people who respected and admired him, people who saw his true worth. Would she go to him? Would she apologize? She remained frozen, eyes fixed on Daniel as he greeted the guests approaching him, men and women who shook his hand, some exchanging words of gratitude, others simply wanting to be in the presence of someone who had achieved so much without forgetting where he came from. Curiosity tugged at me, pulling me forward. I moved through the crowd, pretending to admire the chandeliers and the extravagant floral arrangements, but my focus was sharp. As I passed by, I caught whispers, words floating through the air, reaching her ears just as they reached mine. Did you know he funds education programs for underprivileged kids? I heard he donates to shelters and even works at them, just to stay connected to his roots. A true self-made man, he never forgot where he came from. Each sentence was another weight added to the burden she carried. Her posture shifted, her gaze dropped. Slowly, she looked down at herself. At the shimmering diamonds wrapped around her wrist, at the designer gown that had cost more than some people's yearly salaries. And for the first time I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. Did any of this truly matter? Money could buy luxury. It could buy power, influence, and the illusion of superiority. But it could never buy the kind of respect Daniel had earned tonight. It could never buy the kind of wealth he carried. Not the kind in bank accounts, but the kind in his heart. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she inhaled deeply, straightened her shoulders, and took a step forward. I followed, keeping my distance but close enough to hear. She stopped a few feet away from him, her presence hesitant, almost uncertain. She had never been hesitant before. "Mr. Carter?" she said, her voice softer than before, lacking the arrogance it once held. Daniel turned to her, his expression calm, unreadable. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment, only quiet recognition. He knew exactly who she was. She swallowed hard. I don't know if you remember me." His lips curled slightly, not in a smirk but in something close to acknowledgement. "I do." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. She was nervous, vulnerable even. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what I said at the gas station." She let out a small, uneasy laugh, one that barely masked the shame behind it. "I was rude, and I judged you without knowing anything about you." The room around them continued buzzing with conversation and laughter, but in this moment, everything else faded. It was just the two of them. Daniel studied her, his gaze steady. The silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. She shifted uncomfortably under the weight of it, her fingers twisting together. Then, finally, he spoke. "You judged me because you thought I was just a gas station worker," he said, his voice level, his words deliberate. "But what if I had been? Would my worth have been any less?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to respond, but she couldn't, because she knew the answer. She knew she had been wrong. She blinked rapidly, lowering her gaze. "No, She stopped herself, realizing there was no justification, no excuse she could give. Daniel gave a slow nod, his expression softening but only slightly. "I accept your apology," he said. "But I hope you'll remember this. Everyone deserves respect, no matter what they do." Her breath hitched, and she nodded quickly, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "I will, I promise." And with that, he offered her a polite smile, before turning away, already shifting his attention to someone else. She stood there for a moment, alone in a sea of people, humbled in a way she had never been before. I watched as she turned away, her steps slower, almost hesitant. The confidence she had carried so effortlessly before, her flawless posture, her proud stance, was gone. Now she moved like someone deep in thought, as if replaying every word Daniel had said over and over in her mind. The murmurs of the guests surrounded her, quiet but unmistakable. Some stole quick glances in her direction, whispering behind their hands. Others barely tried to hide their curiosity, their eyes filled with judgment. It was clear that many had witnessed the exchange, had seen her falter in front of a man she had once belittled. She must have felt it too, the weight of their silent stares pressing down on her. She didn't meet anyone's gaze. Instead, she kept her head slightly lowered, clutching the strap of her expensive purse as if it was the only thing keeping her steady. I wondered what was going through her mind. Was she embarrassed? Ashamed? Or was she truly beginning to understand? Maybe this was the moment she needed. A moment of realization, of reckoning. Maybe for the first time in her life, she saw wealth for what it truly was. Not the price tags on clothes, not the glimmer of diamonds, not the brand of a luxury car, but the way a person carries their heart, the way they treat people, no matter their status. As she disappeared into the crowd, I let out a quiet breath, feeling something shift in me too. I turned my gaze back to Daniel, who was now speaking with another guest. His face was calm, unbothered by what had just happened. He wasn't a man who held grudges, and he didn't need to. His success, his integrity, his kindness, they spoke for themselves. He had nothing to prove. And that's what made him different. Daniel wasn't just a rich man, he was a man who had seen struggle, who had walked through fire and come out stronger. He had built his life with his own hands, and yet, he had never let success take away his humility. As I made my way toward the exit, I took one last look at him. Maybe he would never think about this moment again. Maybe he had already moved on, but her? She would remember. And maybe, just maybe, she would be better for it. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful and emotional narratives, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more inspiring content. Don't forget to like the video if you found the story meaningful. Comment below with your thoughts. We love hearing from you. And if you think someone else would enjoy this story, share it with your friends and family. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more amazing stories.